Today, the Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, pitched the idea of an associate EU membership for Ukraine, a kind of interim membership without any voting rights but with some of the benefits of membership. It's a kind of temporary solution before Ukraine eventually becomes a member. But before I go into the details about this suggestion, I will just quickly explain the background to this situation. So, Ukraine for a long time has wanted to become a part of the EU, and especially after the Russian invasion in 2022, it has become a big priority for Ukraine to achieve membership. This is because Ukraine sees itself as a European country, it identifies itself with Europe more than it does with Russia. And Ukraine would benefit greatly from a membership, both economically and by getting access to the EU's internal market and EU funding, but also for security reasons, by being included in the EU's mutual defense clause. And so Ukraine sees EU membership as something necessary so that they, after the war, can recover and get security to secure long-term peace. And in 2022, after the start of the war, Ukraine gained candidate status, which means that there are ongoing negotiations between Ukraine and the EU. But just becoming a candidate country is just the beginning of this process, which can take very, very long. To become a member, you have to close all the so-called negotiating chapters, which means making sure that your country is up to EU standards and in line with EU law. And every member state of the EU has to agree that you have reached these standards. And Ukraine does have a long way to go. It still has problems with things such as corruption. And even though things are getting better, it makes it hard to become an EU member quickly. And there are also other reasons for why Ukraine could be blocked from joining. Countries like Hungary have expressed opposition to Ukraine's membership. The former Prime Minister Orban even stalled many sanctions against Russia and EU funding to Ukraine. Now Orban is gone and we have a new Prime Minister. But even though Magyar is more EU-friendly and he seems to be a more reasonable guy to negotiate with, there still seems to be some skepticism towards Ukraine membership. But I think it's too early to tell and we will have to see how Magyar acts. But also, even countries who largely support Ukraine and share their hatred for Russia have some skepticism towards Ukraine's accession to the EU. Poland, for example, could be worried about how Ukraine's access to the internal market would affect their farmers, since cheap Ukrainian grains would flood into the EU. So there are still many things that have to be worked out before Ukraine can actually join the EU. Even so, Zelensky has repeatedly stressed how important EU membership is for Ukraine. He has brought up very early dates, such as 2027, which is, very optimistic. Such a quick accession is probably not going to happen. And it seems like much of the momentum of Ukraine's road to EU membership has stalled. It is still a long-time goal for both Ukraine and for many in Europe, but it doesn't seem like it can happen anytime soon. So that's where Merz comes in with this suggestion of an associate membership. This idea of a kind of an EU light membership has been floated before, but now Merz comes with this suggestion. He says that it would be a temporary solution. The long-term goal is still for a full membership for Ukraine. And he says that Ukraine will be able to take part in EU summits and ministerial meetings, but without any voting rights. So they would be able to debate and discuss things with other EU leaders. They would kind of be observers, but they wouldn't be able to actually vote. And Ukraine could also get their own commissioner in the European Commission and MEPs in the European Parliament, but again, without any voting rights. And Ukraine would also be eligible for some funding from parts of the EU budget. And most importantly, I think for Ukraine, they would get security guarantees through the EU's mutual assistance clause, which is, this clause in the EU treaties, which says that, if one country is attacked, then the others will assist, which is generally seen not as strong as Article 5 of NATO, but still something the Ukraine would very, very much like to be a part of. But Friedrich Merz also says that he wants a snap-back mechanism, which means that if Ukraine backslid on like rule of law and all the standards necessary for full accession, then this interim membership would be annulled. So there's still like this demand that Ukraine must fulfill these standards. And Merz said about this proposal that my proposal reflects Ukraine's particular situation, a country at war. It will help facilitate the ongoing peace talks as part of a negotiated peace solution, Merz wrote. And so we will see if other European leaders will get behind this proposal, or even if Ukraine would be interested in such a proposal. I think Ukraine would like to get closer to the EU, and this could be a way to do it. But there's also a fear in the Ukraine that, if they agree to such an interim solution, then maybe they get stuck in this kind of a limbo and get stuck in this associate membership for many, many years and actually never get to become a full member. So for that reason, maybe the Ukraine isn't actually that excited about these prospects. But I do think that the inclusion of the EU's mutual defense clause could be like the most important thing for Ukraine at the moment. So maybe that will be enough for them to agree to this. But then again, we will have to see what the other European leaders think about it.